Okay, so next up on the agenda, we have Derik Dressler, who is the Regional Collaboration Specialist with RCAP Solutions. He's based here in the state of Pennsylvania. Many of you know him, and he has really been the backbone of the planning for this event. So thank you, Derik, for all of your work. And he is going to be discussing the advantages to implementing regional solutions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Can everyone hear in the back? I'm not sure if we discussed that. Okay. Yes, like Sarah had said, I recently joined RCAP since last June. Previous to that, I worked for the Department of Environmental Protection here in PA for close to 15 years. I was the operations chief in the Safe Drinking Water Program. And so from that, that's how I got to form a lot of relationships with many of the folks out here in the audience here today. So what we're going to be discussing, what I'm going to be discussing is the advantages to implementing regional solutions, what that means, what that looks like. It's kind of the crux of the whole reason why we are doing the Collaboration Summit here today, to kind of give you kind of a brief or a 101 course on regional collaboration. And a few of these slides here at the beginning, Sarah had already covered to a certain extent. But I would like to mention that this summit, and actually much of the regionalization work that we do has been funded by the Spring Point Partners Foundation, LLC, out of Philadelphia. We're working off of a grant through them. It's a private foundation that was formed a number of years ago to support the efforts in drinking water initiatives, including regionalization. So Sarah had already covered RCAP. Here's a good map of the regions that we cover throughout the United States. We have an overarching organization of RCAP national office that oversees all those regions as well. Here's just a quick list of services that we provide. We do anything from on-site assistance to vulnerability studies, emergency response plans. We provide operator training, management board training. We work off of grant monies through different federal agencies, including the EPA and USDA, to provide these types of trainings and on-site assistance. So let's get into today's events. What are we here for? What are the objectives of today? We're here to encourage an open mind, or encourage open minds, creative thinking regarding regional collaboration. This is, even though I'm standing up here, I'm in a tie and, did my hair this morning and try to look presentable as I can. I would like to think of this as being in an informal type of event where we can have an honest and open discussion between us. If there's questions, just raise your hand. If you don't know the person next to you, get to know them. It's just much more beneficial for us if we can just, break down those walls and have an honest discussion about regional collaboration. We're going to identify the benefits and challenges of regional collaboration. We're going to share some examples, especially when it comes to the panel. We have different folks here that have different experiences with the collaboration efforts. Maybe limited experience, it might be 25 years of experience. But we're going to share those stories, and it's going to be the good, bad, and the ugly of those efforts. And believe me, there's plenty of ugly out there that we will be bringing up. We're going to explore what it means to be a good partner, and as I mentioned, learn from one another in open discussion on experiences with regional collaboration. So into the background and system capacity and what it means to be sustainable as a system, whether it's drinking water or wastewater. So if we look at system capacity, what is it? Well, it's the ability to plan for, achieve, and continually provide safe and affordable drinking water to customers, thereby increasing public health protection. And capacity development is the process through which drinking water systems acquire and maintain the technical, managerial, financial capabilities to consistently provide safe drinking water. I know that that's a mouthful, but that's why I put it up there, so we can really look at it and digest that, what that means. But one tool for building capacity, and what we're really looking at today, is system partnership solutions or regional collaboration. We acknowledge that this is not an answer to all the water systems problems. This is just one tool that can be helpful for them to attain the status of being a sustainable system. So here's just some background, some statistics that have been explored through different research and different avenues that I've looked into over the last number of months. But 84% of America's 53,000 community water systems are small systems serving fewer than 3,300 people. Very small water systems have the highest number of violations per 1,000 people of all systems. Very small systems have approximately 14,000 monitoring and reporting violations for every 1 million people served, whereas the large systems have only 42. I know that if you're here today and you are an operator or server on board for a small system, it's probably, while the number itself is pretty alarming, like that's a huge increase, it's probably not too terribly surprising either, because we all know these larger systems have quite a number of more resources to be able to deal with, keeping up with the state and federal regulations. You have resources where you might have dedicated staff that do nothing but report to the state and to the federal government, whereas we have a very small system. We have that one guy and he does it all, including hanging Christmas lights and plowing snow and mowing the park. So let's look at the small system ownership. What does that look like? Well, most water systems serving fewer than 500 people are owned by homeowner associations, apartment complex landlords, mobile home park owners, church officials, school districts, and other part-time volunteers. And due to the lack of managerial or financial capacity, it's been noted that small systems violate EPA monitoring and reporting standards at a much greater rate than the larger counterparts, which is really taken from that previous slide there, so that was already mentioned. This is the interesting thing. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, the EPA requires all community water systems, regardless of size, to meet or exceed the standards on drinking water quality. So again, to kind of go back, whether you're serving 500,000 people or 38 people in a mobile home park, those monitoring or those standards are virtually the exact same across the board. The only exception is, the larger, many of the monitoring requirements are on like graduated scale based on system population. But the fact that they need to meet, all the health-based standards, the requirements of certified operator, all the reporting, it's virtually all the same. So because of the small size of the customer base, small systems face greater challenges than larger water systems in meeting standards while operating their system in a sustainable manner. So what are the challenges? We all know these, especially if you're from a small system here today. We have the environmental regulations challenge, keeping up with all the all the new requirements trickling down from the state It seems like every few years there's a new updated reg package that comes down, and that typically requires, quite a bit of attention from the small system. So it takes a lot of resources to keep up with those requirements. Rates. Nobody likes to adjust rates. Nobody likes to, bump rates up. Many small systems, rates have been stagnant for years. It's surprising to me how many small systems out there don't understand or acknowledge the true cost of water. Many small systems don't even know really how much money it costs to produce the water that they serve to their customers. So how can you expect to run a sustainable system if we don't even know how much the product that we're serving truly costs the system? Many different resources out there to use to try to establish a cost, to put a ticket number on that. And then the other problem is let's say you formulate what that number is. Now you know what the true cost of water is. Well, it's going to be shocking when you take that true cost to your board and say, look, this is what it actually costs. It's going to be a hard sell for you to actually charge what you need to recoup all your costs. If you look at all the assets in the ground, all the depreciation, the aging infrastructure, there's a lot that goes into it. Boards, it's becoming increasingly hard or difficult to get board members. Nobody wants to volunteer their time. Nobody wants to do something where they're not getting paid. That culture, this is my personal opinion, but the culture of that mindset has long been gone for probably 3 or 4 decades. It's been slowly, leaving and what I'm talking about is like the small town town member that really takes an interest and puts a lot of effort into their community, where they want to be established, where they want to put in that extra time and effort into, creating an environment for their community that, really supports the small hometown. Now it just seems to me if, especially the younger generation, if it's something that they're not going to get something like a direct benefit out of, then they're not going to participate. And I think that's been really detrimental to the small system. Here's just an example graph of really economies of scale when it comes to treatment cost. This was taken, 12 years ago from American Water, so it probably looks slightly different. I think the trend would be, probably the same thing. But this is just to kind of point out treatment costs per gallon of water, per 1,000 gallon water, based on population size of systems. So we can easily see that for a very small system, it's much more expensive to treat the water than it is for a larger system. Primarily just economies of scale. This next graph, we'll look at inflation from the year of 2000 until 2016. So if you look at electricity, the electricity rates are on the bottom. The blue line is the consumer price index. And as we can see, water and sewer are quite a bit off from that somewhat stagnant line. So what is regional collaboration? I know I already kind of touched on this, so we'll kind of go through this rather quickly. So it's to collaborate with one another, with another organization for mutual benefit to both organizations. It can increase efficiencies by eliminating duplicative services. It can add or improve services you can't afford or afford to do well on your own. And it could change the way a system does business in order to ensure its customers the best possible service at the lowest possible cost. So now that we defined it, it is called couple different things. It could be a partnership. We mentioned regionalization. It could be cooperation or a co-op, restructuring, or shared services. They virtually mean all the same type of thing. So when is this considered? You know, you're a small system, you're facing some difficulties. When should we look at collaborating with another system? When funding capacity is limited, compliance is not affordably attained, maybe source redundancy is a need, when your volunteer base is burning out, or you see an opportunity to create economies of scale, just as I've referred to there a few slides before. So this image here shows you the collaboration spectrum. When we refer to regional collaboration, we could be talking about any one of these types of collaboration. So we go from, on the left there, we go from informal cooperation the whole way up to ownership transfer. We're going to be talking about contractual assistance or formation of joint powers agency. And look at examples for all of these. I will tell you, I mean, we're not here, I mean, regionalization as a whole can kind of be a bad word. You know, nobody wants to hear regionalization. They hear that and they think, oh, you're just talking about, you know, another system coming in and taking over. One of these large private systems just buying us out. That's really not what we're talking about. While it is a form of regionalization, that's not really our priority here. We really focus in on informal cooperation and contractual assistance. That's what we would really like to hone in on. There is very good examples of you know, joint water authorities throughout the state that have become very effective and you know, deliver a great product and you know, keep rates down for customers. So it's nothing against that. I mean, we have excellent examples of that. But from RCAP's perspective, we're really talking about the informal cooperation and contractual assistance. So what is informal cooperation? It's a non-structural form of regionalization that would not require reluctant water systems to give up ownership of their system, thereby eliminating one of the main obstacles to regionalization. So informal cooperation, we're not talking about giving up any decision-making powers, any assets, nothing like that. A good example of this would be PA Warren. Many of you probably participate in PA Warren here in Pennsylvania. Many other states, I'm not sure, maybe all of the states have something very similar to this. But this is a mutual aid agreement. It's a process for sharing emergency resources among water and wastewater agencies statewide. So to many of us, I mean, this just makes sense. You know, I'm a small system. I can't afford to go out and buy the 2 or 3 required generators that I would need to operate my system or my 2 mountain wells that, you know, don't have auxiliary power. But if I participate with PA Warren with, you know, no contract, there's really no obligation. You're just part of the resource network. You know, if emergency comes up, I need that resource. I can make contact with them. They also participate with, you know, countless other small water systems or medium-sized water systems where we could share equipment. Yeah, so with PA Warren, you know, it's really a forum for developing and maintaining emergency contacts and relationships, and it was really designed to respond and recover more quickly from natural or human-caused disaster. As I said, this is just an example of what informal cooperation could look like. Contractual assistance, what does this look like? Well, this is a service that would require a contract, but the contract is under the system's control. Many of you already do this, I'm sure, with certified lab. Every water system, wastewater system in PA needs to, have samples analyzed by a certified lab in PA. This typically would require a contract. This is in the service that you can provide on your own, so you hire someone out to do it. A lot of small systems have circuit rider operators. It's something that they can, provide on their own or provide very well, so they'll hire a circuit rider operator on a contract to perform the operations of their system. That's an example of contractual assistance. So these are all forms of regional collaboration. Many of you are already doing this, whether you knew that you were doing it under a collaboration effort or not. I'm here to tell you, you are. So let's look at the Joint Power Agency. This would be a creation of a new entity designed to serve systems that form it. There's a lot of local ones just around here that are joint authorities. It requires cooperation and possible negotiation with member systems in areas covered by the Joint Powers Agency. It could be a shared system management, could be a system where they share a source of water for multiple systems, or a shared treatment facility. Or it could mean on the far right side, ownership transfer. So this would be just a total acquisition of an existing entity into another, or it could be a creation of a new entity. We see a lot of the private systems in PA, the PA Americans, United Water, Aqua PA. We see them buying up little systems, throughout Pennsylvania. More often than not, it happens because those small systems just get to a point where they cannot do it anymore. They lost total interest. They don't have the people stepping up on the boards, or they're, very much in debt. They don't have the means to really recover, to replace line, to update their treatment plan. They're typically in very bad positions. It gives the private system, the advantage to come in, pay off their existing debt, buy the assets, and then that relieves, the obligation under the small water system. It's in my opinion, it's unfortunate, but I can see why it happens. I've visited too many systems that have gone this route just because their hands are completely tied. So what are the benefits? Go ahead, Jeff.
Is there a chance for questions?
Yeah.
Oh, so some of the states that we work in, Massachusetts, Rhode Island and Connecticut, we're seeing that triggered the ownership transfer takeover by the DEP in those states when certain systems hit certain issues.
Right.
Is that happening in Pennsylvania?
No, not that I'm aware. And Chad Miller is here. He's the program manager for the state drinking water program out of the North Central region. But I don't think I can't think of an example where the state would have come in and taken over.
Yeah, like in Connecticut, they make someone else take it over.
Like to mandate, go ahead, Victor.
Just in the wastewater side, it doesn't happen often, but I've done it once. We'll order, the local municipality will have to provide sewer service. So if this was a private plant that just fell apart, nobody cared about it.
Yeah.
So eventually we ordered the township to take it over.
Okay.
And unfortunately it was the township that had no experience with sewer service, 530s and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But if, at least on the sewer side, if a private entity abandons a plant, probably even the municipality is stuck with it.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
I see hands flying up.
Okay.
Jenna, I think part of the reason there is that in Pennsylvania, we have Act 537.
The sewage facilities.
That Nick is talking about. And there's a responsibility for municipalities to provide for the sewage needs of their municipality. We don't have a corresponding act on the drinking water side. So there is no obligation for a municipality to provide drinking water services for their municipality.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So, I don't disagree with anything anybody said. There is cooperation, I would say, between or among DEP, Public Utility Commission, and I'm with the Consumer Advocate's Office, and we represent consumers' interests. And some states have similar setups. So on the water side, if a DEP sanitarian or anything like that is seeing a lot of issues with a water company, like we just had one where it was a do not consume, but it was a small private system, they talked to our office and to the commission, and the Public Utility Commission can appoint a receiver. So that's what we worked out there. But it was a nice example, recent example of cooperation among all the agencies to deal with the emergency situation essentially, and then looking for longer term solutions.
You did that with, and this is wastewater again. The facility I just talked about wasn't PUC regulated, but we did have a PUC regulated facility who didn't pay their electric bill.
Right.
And then the PUC stepped in, named a receiver, and the receiver, we're still in the process of transferring.
Yep. I mean, there's nice examples over really a long time about opportunities for DEP, the systems, and the advocate's office to sort of work together to find a solution, both temporary and longer term. And Mark knows all about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's Act 529 in PUC, that's just for PUC regulated systems. That's not for municipal that are non-regulated. They don't fall under that.
Right. Sarah?
And later when EPA is giving their presentation, Brooke may talk a little bit about it, but also some of you may or may not be aware, but under America's Water Infrastructure Act that was passed in 2018, this fall EPA is issuing their water system restructuring rule, which basically gives states the authority, and they can choose to or not to force consolidation, but for systems that have, for water systems, that have a long history of non-compliance and are really considered intractable, but versus being the 1,000 population that is typically intractable up to 10,000, those the states have the ability to require an assessment to be done for that water system to look at regional options, and not just the traditional look at pipe-to-pipe technical connection, but looking at a number of different options and really assessing not just the technical feasibility, but the managerial and financial feasibility of their various options as well.
Right. And just to point out, and you did say this, Sarah, but it just requires the assessment. Does not require a
And
the actual work.
And there are some states, like California is probably the most famous for it, but they did pass a law a couple years ago that requires, that they can require a consolidation if necessary,
Right.
mostly based on health violations on the water side. And also another law that when a new system is trying to get permitted, they have to look at interconnection with an existing system before they're allowed to go through the process of building out a new system.
Right. Dennis, could you?
I had a question for Sarah. Who would conduct the assessment?
So that is something that they're working on right now. So they haven't put out the draft rule yet. It should be coming out shortly, and then they're going to have a comment period. But basically the law says that the assessment cannot be overly burdensome, but that it is going to have to meet minimum requirements. So that's something that EPA is working on and putting together right now. I think that there could be various options. They've talked a lot to the RCAP network about potentially being a neutral third party that could come in and do the assessment, or working with engineering firms. I think there's a couple of different options, and maybe the state primacy agency may also be able to do the assessment. I think it's going to be maybe somewhat similar to RTCR in the fact that you have various folks that can do. That can conduct it, depending on the state.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So on to benefits of regional collaboration. Like I said, we had mentioned some of these before, but we could decrease the cost due to the elimination of multiple different, services that 2 or more systems, provide. Give you an increased capacity to meet different regulations and build capacity, whether it be technical, financial, or managerial. So why would we want to share services? It could potentially increase efficiency, reduce overhead, increase capacity, improve service to the end user, improve public opinion of your services, could also improve your creditworthiness, improve compliance, and possible assistance with emergencies or disasters, much like the PA1 example that I gave earlier. These I just threw up as benefits to regulatory compliance. I know within the last couple of years, within the state of PA anyway, we've had some new regulations come down. Formulation of plans for uninterrupted service plan, a new distribution role. Method 334 compliance is a standard established by EPA to have you maintain your digital colorimeters for chlorine testing. That's been proven to be pretty tricky to maintain compliance with. Just kind of a pretty steep learning curve for the operators here in PA. How about the technical benefits? Could be improved source water quality, sharing or upgrading or building new infrastructure, more efficient treatment technologies, may provide greater access to certified operators and expertise, or share operators' information, equipment, tools, and so forth. The benefits from a managerial perspective. Could be shared management resources, improved customer service, sharing of information, improved delivery of services. As I mentioned before, the financial benefits could be access to better rates or improved creditworthiness. And we actually have, here in the afternoon, as Sarah mentioned, we have USDA and Penvest that are going to be speaking to this. Challenges. What are the challenges? We're going to really explore the challenges here this afternoon, but this is just kind of a teaser I'm going to throw out there. Many of these, are just common sense. We all know that these exist. But especially with small systems, there's this fear of loss of identity and control of their small system if they were to work with the neighboring system or have some sort of agreement or express the idea of sharing different services with one another. Just that fear of identity or control of that system, because many of these operators, have been there for a number of years, many years, and there's they really take pride in what they do, and they look over these systems like it's one of their own, and they don't want to give any of that up, and it's certainly understandable. Could be political boundaries. The local townships, municipalities, may not be that doable. Intergovernmental conflicts, maybe difficulty in negotiation, or maybe you're just totally unfamiliar with regional collaboration and what it looks like. So that's part of the reason why we're here today. Could be having issues with consultants, different environmental groups, development issues, personnel and labor issues, could be historic rivalries. I've been in many towns where this has come up. They fail to work with the neighboring system because they don't really care for them, because in 1985 they won the district football championship. We all chuckle because we know it's true. I wish I was making that up. But so I'm going to leave you with this here, just some questions to ponder. Really, when we consider this, we really need to look. Defining commonalities is really key in regional collaboration. We need to come together and focus in on what is the main goal, what is the ultimate goal. We need to keep the customer in mind. That's really the goal, providing the best, possible, safest water that we can. So will the community or public be better served by regional collaboration? What are the added benefits that the community will receive? Keep the customer, the community as the primary focus and goal of these efforts. And I really like this quote when talking about regionalization. Simply merging or consolidating systems together will not necessarily give you a better system. It may only give you one large bad system. So that's there just to remind us, just by, collaborate, that may not be the answer, but it certainly is a tool to, work towards sustainability. So I'll open it up to questions. We answered a few back there, and I like that discussion. I like that, this format where, just feel free to raise your hand and we'll talk about anything that's brought up. So any questions? Yep, Dennis?
I talked to 2 different water operators and managers recently who were kind of in strong systems that are near weaker systems, that certainly have the capability in all categories, technical, managerial, and financial, to help out a struggling system. But they both expressed to me that a core obstacle is the liability that they would have to take on for the weaker system. And it's all sorts of liability. It could be environmental compliance liability. It could be liability for stranded assets. So kind of more of a financial liability.
Right. So
They could also be jeopardizing the trust of the customers that they do have, that through running a system effectively for many years, they're kind of taking on a risk
Sure.
that they don't want to ruin a good relationship with their current ratepayers and have those people think that they're just taking, that the rates are going to go up because of the stranded assets of this weaker system.
Right. So Sarah was kind of working her way over here. She's going to chime in here because I think there are provisions in WIA that kind of address that. So I'll let her kind of fill you in.
So I am not sure if this legislation is going to pass or not, but there is current legislation in Washington. There's a partnerships bill that's sponsored by Senator Duckworth out of Illinois. And it talks about a number of those things and basically talks about safe harbor and talks about giving a grace period for that larger system that would be taking on the problem to be able to not be hit with any compliance fines and have a certain amount of time to be able to get the system back up to compliance without having any of those negative impacts. And then the question of the finances and the debt definitely comes up. It touches on that a little bit. But one thing that I would say, and I'm sure that USDA and Penvest may talk a little bit about this when they present later, but there's definitely options to consider. I know one of our staff in New Mexico has had a lot of luck with the USDA office being willing to do some refinancing to be able to help consolidate and work through some of the debt issues. Any other questions? Go ahead, Suk.
So if you're working with a small system and they have a variety of options in front of them, including some of the options that Derik has covered, but they're fearful, what would you say to the water system? And I kind of was hoping to hear a little bit from each of you.
Great. I mean, I think that some of the folks that have participated in Regional Solutions can speak to this some. I know there are some of you in the room. But I would say one of the things that we often will recommend is to start small. You know, maybe the ultimate goal might be a full physical or managerial consolidation, but I think that building those relationships and building that trust is really important. So it may be that you kind of start with some of the smaller things. So maybe you're sharing equipment, maybe you're buying chemicals in bulk, maybe you're contracting out the financial services. And then once that relationship has been established and both the staff of the system and the leadership as well as the communities are kind of comfortable with that and not fearful of one another, then if it makes sense, you can start to kind of gradually increase that level of collaboration that exists because that kind of base is set of that trust building. But I don't know, Ramon, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we have a gentleman here who's from New Mexico. He works for RCAC, our Western partner, but prior to that, he was actually one of our regionalization projects, and our staff, worked with his community to do a regional collaboration. So I don't know if you have any insights that you want to share based on your experience.
Yes, so good morning. To the particular question that Sue asked, I think that one of the things that's critical to developing trust within many communities, thank you, is allowing it to be a process. So bringing everyone to the table so that everyone can express their concerns or the goals that they might have collectively. And I think that it goes back to one of the things that Derik talked about, and that was identifying the commonalities between all of the existing potential systems that are working with each other. I think that once you identify the commonalities, it becomes easier to start the conversation, which eventually can lead to the point that we're talking about with the idea of collaborating at different levels and then building on those levels as the trust is built. And so I think that the other piece that was really critical in our particular case was, along with commonality, was developing vision. That we had a vision that everyone could agree to, so that as the challenges arose, we always went back to the vision about sustainability, providing safe drinking water, kind of the very basic things that we all have a goal towards. So I think that that was incredibly important to us.
Thank you, Ramon. Any other comments on that before we go to another question? Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on Suk's question one more time too. I think another key piece to it is it's all education, education, education. I'm Zach, I'm Derik's counterpart in Illinois, so I have a couple of larger projects that this is the process that they're going through right now, working their way towards full consolidation. And a lot of them were fearful early on. It's fear of the unknown. So, and one thing that I thought was important for us that we did as part of our process is they wanted to know what their options are, right? They don't know what they don't know. So it's important to lay out all the different options of the way those things can go and what types of structure that the new entity or organization can undertake and make sure that they all understand the pros and the cons of every single one. It kind of helps alleviate that fear because it makes them, you're not pushing one idea, right? You're making sure everyone understands all the possibilities, and then ultimately let them decide as a collective group after they learn to trust each other through identification of commonalities and all that we touched on. So,
I think what Zach and Ramon are saying is that the goal isn't necessarily the entity that comes out of it, but if you communicate the goal as the shared commonalities, the safe drinking water and the sustainability, that is the goal. Whatever form of entity might come out of it, that's not necessarily the goal, it's just the vehicle. So let's not talk of the ultimate goal being regionalization. Let's talk about the ultimate goal being sustainability and safe drinking water and resiliency, because people can get behind that. It's kind of like, how do we get there? That's going to be the ugly that we have to work out. The process. Ramon said, this is, it's a process. Collaboration is a process. So you can't necessarily drive toward a goal that you don't all agree on. You arrive at what is the best vehicle to get to a goal that you agree on.
Ramon, you didn't say how long that process was for you.
Yes, that was, it was about a 2-year process. So in our particular case, we had about 13 separate public water systems that came to the table. We started in 2004 to start the conversations. And in 2006, we formed an umbrella organization that allowed each of the entities to remain autonomous, but yet collaborate in areas such as seeking funding collectively to address the infrastructure needs that were more pressing in the larger community. So that was about a 2-year process. After that, it took about an additional 2 years to actually build enough trust so that individual public water systems began to dissolve and then create then another entity, which was a kind of a regional entity of itself.
What was the size of the geographic area?
Approximately 30 linear miles, more or less.
Square miles?
Square miles, it was huge area, yeah, pretty large area.
And Ramon was one of the, I know, something that we don't have as many challenges with in the Northeast. We have our own challenges, but in the West, water scarcity is a big deal. There's been a lot of issues with drought, and New Mexico was one of the first states that really got hit the hardest by that. And I would say that out West, that is often one of the drivers that has communities kind of come together and think about shared solutions is water scarcity. Was that the case with your set of systems? Or was it more compliance? What was the driver?
The driver was more sustainability, actually. So many of the systems were having challenges keeping up with infrastructure and compliance. Water scarcity is really kind of challenging in New Mexico, and the state, all of the western states own the water, so we consider them water rights. And actually, in some cases, we have some entities that have more water rights that they can actually place to beneficial use, and other entities that are on the opposite end of that. The water right discussion in our particular case was really confusing and took a long time to develop understanding around. And so that was people had the fear of losing their water rights, although they never even really owned them. But they didn't understand that. So that took about 2 years to kind of settle out. So really challenging that way.
Great, thank you. And I'm really glad that you asked the question about timeline. That's something that Laura's definitely going to talk about a little later in the research that we did. Being patient is really important. I think that sometimes these processes can be rushed, and then maybe you didn't cover all of the bases when you went through it the first time. I've talked to a lot of folks in Kentucky, for example. A number of years ago, there was a huge effort because of the interests of the governor to regionalize, and they have a ton of large water systems now, but now that they're in those situations, they're realizing that they didn't think through all of the managerial and financial pieces. They just thought through the technical solution, and it was kind of rushed, and now they're like, well, we really wish that we had taken the time in the beginning, because there are lots of folks that are really unhappy with their current situation. So that is something that I would definitely highly recommend, is being patient. Sometimes these things do happen faster and there's a lot of momentum. It could take a year or 2 years. Sometimes it takes 10 years. But you just kind of have to be patient and stay the course. Any other questions? Yes.
Someone in the back, maybe it was you, had mentioned something about this new EPA assessment role. Could you touch on that a little bit more?
Sure, and I think, one thing that we could probably do when we're going to send a follow-up email with some materials is we could share a link or a presentation that goes into detail about that a little more. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but basically the new rule, and again, they're drafting it right now, so I haven't seen the final language. I've just been part of some of the conversations. But basically, each state, at their own discretion, is going to be able to decide to do this or not. So it's not required of the states, but it basically gives each state water primacy agency the ability to require a regional assessment for systems that are have had historic challenges and continual challenges with compliance. And it's health-based compliance, not monitoring and reporting. So each state is going to be able to utilize this assessment so that folks can at least have all the information on the table about what some of their potential options are. But they're not necessarily having the state require it, although the state could choose to make their own law to require it like they do in California if they felt that that was what they wanted to do. But it's really just kind of pushing the exploration so that people are really kind of thinking through some non-traditional regional options. Does that answer your question?
Any idea on when this might be
Yeah.
implemented?
So per the America's Water Infrastructure Act, AWIA, all of the pieces have to be in place by the end of this fiscal year. So the final rule will have to be completed by the end of September. So I'm assuming that the draft is going to be coming out soon, and then they'll have a comment period so folks can provide feedback, as EPA generally does with their rules, and then they'll take that into consideration as they finalize it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One comment I'd like to make, we haven't touched too much on, is the very, very small water and wastewater plants. With all these new regulations that are coming down and economic liabilities that these small companies are having, they are on the verge of either declaring bankruptcy or even a death in the family, that a homeowner has a rural land development where he has 30 houses or 40 houses on a sewer plant or a water company. Act 537 designates that the township gets these, which is fine if the township can afford them. I've run through a couple of situations where the township was fined heavily by DEP because of no neglect of the township, but neglect of the original owner who there was a death, and there was no heirs to take over, and that was the same thing. And with the water companies, yeah, you have big water companies that are interested in buying water companies, but they're only interested in buying profitable or expandable. They have no desire to take on a 15 mobile home park or a sewer plant that's, establishing anywhere from 3 houses to 20 houses. So there could be you talk about outbreaks in viruses, there could be an outbreak of all these because the push from the environmental requirements versus the economic requirements is coming to a point where I believe the sustainability of these small places really have to have a close scrutiny in order for them to survive. And they're the mainstay of a lot of Pennsylvania communities.
Yeah, so I can't speak to Pennsylvania specifically, and Derik or some of the folks that are here from DEP, they have some comments. But I would say that, again, I mentioned the legislation that is in Washington right now around partnerships, and that, like I said, is a big piece of it, is making sure that the larger entity that's taking over, the receiver, doesn't necessarily get fined or punished for being a good neighbor and taking over the other system. I would say too, and Derik mentioned this, we, as from RCAP's point of view, we definitely support when it's the best solution for one of those larger private companies to come in, but generally we try to encourage like public to public partnership, because we do recognize that local control is definitely a concern, and it is, like you said, a center point of many communities. So being able to continue to have the participation of those communities on their boards, making decisions that help their own communities and having that voice is something that we really value, and that we make sure that when we're working with systems, really encourage them to think through all of those long-term implications of what they're going to be doing and how that's going to impact the voice of the local folks.
Yeah, and I'd like to respond also over here. The role of RCAP is as a third party, non-biased entity. So what we can do is we can take you through a process to evaluate all reasonable options. What are those options? What are those costs involved? What are the pros and cons, etc. At the end of the day, it is still very much, right now, a local decision. And so what we want to do is just make sure, though, that those critical discussions are happening, and that when we do look at all options, we're comparing apples to apples, and that we're talking about the same critical things as far as technical, managerial, and financial capacity as well. But we respect that it is local. Oops, sorry.
You gotta talk, be a close talker to the microphone. So we are, just have one more minute left in this section before we go to break. So any last minute questions before we move on?
No question, but a comment.
Yes.
I'm a supervisor at the township.
Okay.
I've been on our local sewer authority for about 6 years. We have 5 municipalities in our sewer system. We're expanding about 75 homes this year. Next year, we'll probably be adding about 200 over the next 2 years, I guess, about 200 homes. And it's all about the money that we got into this large of a plant. But going to some other seminars, well, in our area, we lost 8 police departments, and it's all about money. So I'm on a committee now to try to regionalize that because of the money. I went to a seminar on fire. There used to be about 50,000 volunteers in Pennsylvania. We're down to about 10,000. We have 2 fire companies within 2 blocks, 5 more blocks away another fire company, and about 5 miles away another fire company, and everyone's trying to get money for $1 million ladder truck. So money is the big reason to get together and get all this stuff put back together so we all can afford something.
I think that's really 2 great points. One is that the need to regionalize or potentially partner isn't just in water and wastewater. They're looking at it, like you said, in police, in fire, in schools. A lot of rural areas have consolidated school districts. So it definitely is not unique to us. And the other thing that I would say before we end is that the financing is definitely really important. Just like you said, there are fire districts, one after another. Like I know where we are in Massachusetts, we have a lot of municipal systems, but also a lot of special districts. And in some small towns, you have a municipal water system and then 5 other small districts in the same town that are all trying to maintain their infrastructure, trying to recruit board members, and trying to be able to keep rates low. So that, money definitely is a really important aspect. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you, Derik, for the great presentation. We're going to go to break and start back at 10. We'll give you 10:32.